is responsible for the Birmingham pub bombings? It has been 50 years and we still do not know who the perpetrators are in one of the longest running investigations in British history. November 21st, 1974. 5 Irishmen were on their way to visit a funeral of one of their friends, an Irish Republican Army member who accidentally blew himself up a week earlier. The train left at exactly 8 p.m. At exactly 8:25, a bomb went off in a pub in Birmingham City. 2 minutes later, another explosion happened in another pub nearby. The bombing killed 21 people and injured more than 200 in one of the deadliest explosions that hit the United Kingdom since World War II. Hours after the explosion, the 5 men who left by train earlier that day were arrested, along with another man who waved them off at the train station. These men would come to be known as the Birmingham Six. After a lengthy trial, they were each given life sentences. That's the end, right? Well, after 16 years behind bars, these men, the Birmingham Six, were found completely innocent.
16 and a half years! We've been used as political scapegoats! The police told us from the start that they knew we hadn't done it! They told us they didn't care who done it! They told us that we were going to frame us! Justice! I don't think them people in there have got the intelligence nor the honesty to spell the word!
This incident is one of the few instances of the Troubles, a Northern Ireland conflict, seeping into the UK mainland. So, what are the Troubles? Let me explain. Well, the Troubles could be described as a sectarian conflict which lasted between 1968 to 1998 in Northern Ireland between 2 main parties, the Irish Republican Army, also known as the IRA, and the British Police and British Army. The history of the conflict in Northern Ireland actually dates back centuries, as early as the 17th century, when the Kingdom of England colonized much of Ulster, what is modern-day Northern Ireland. After that, hundreds of English and Scottish settlers, also known as planters, poured into Ulster, took control of the farmland, and they also tried to influence the Catholic Church into becoming more Protestant and becoming pro-Crown. Well, as you can imagine, this was not such a popular change of the state of affairs in Ireland. Certainly not for the locals. The Irish Catholics would deal with hundreds of years of injustice. For example, in the 18th century, the Irish Catholics were not allowed to rent or own property, which also meant they were not allowed to vote, because the right to vote at the time was intrinsically linked to you owning property. Going into the 20th century, the Irish Catholic population still had to deal with a lot of social injustice, pushing them to form a civil rights movement. In 1921 specifically, the Irish Free State would gain independence. However, Northern Ireland remained as part of the United Kingdom. Let's go back to the Troubles. During the Troubles, multiple parties took inspiration from the United States Civil Rights Movement and started one of their own in Northern Ireland. They were holding frequent protests asking for more equitable social conditions for the Irish Catholic community. This has become a centuries-old tale by now. Police certainly noticed the rising number of protests and they tried to crack down on them. However, they could not contain the sheer numbers of Irish pouring out into the streets every time. Well, they apparently had to deploy the British Army as well to contain these overwhelming numbers of protests. On January 30, 1972, as many as 15,000 people gathered in the Bogside area of Derry in Northern Ireland to protest the government's controversial policy of internment, which allowed for the arrest and imprisonment of suspected IRA members without any trials. Mind you, large gatherings were strictly prohibited at this time, but the predominantly Catholic population defied those orders and insisted on continuing their rallies. Tensions continued to escalate on that day, as the army started using water cannons to disperse the rioters. In turn, many rioters started pelting the soldiers with bricks and bottles. The army then started using rubber bullets, and eventually they switched to live rounds. British soldiers killed 26 unarmed civilians on that day, many of whom died on the spot, while others were shot in the back as they were attempting to flee or help the wounded. Every single victim was Catholic. What I just described to you is called Bloody Sunday. If there was any hope that peaceful means of finding justice would help the Catholics, Bloody Sunday completely extinguished it. The Irish youth are starting to look at the IRA as their new savior, more specifically the Provisional IRA, also known as the Provos. They use more violent means of fighting and resisting. Well, the elephant in the room is that the British troops far outclassed the Provos in every possible way, at least when it comes to warfare. Traditional warfare, that is, because the Provos started implementing something that we now know as guerrilla warfare. The effect of Bloody Sunday cannot be understated. In that year alone, following that fateful day, the IRA carried out 10 bombings. In the Troubles, 10,000 bombings were carried out. Again, all of them by the IRA. The conflict did also spill over into the UK, which takes us back to our original topic, the Birmingham pub bombings. One of the biggest players in freeing the Birmingham Six was investigative journalist Chris Mullen. Mullen cast doubt on the forensics evidence and even featured in an interview with an unnamed bomber. In 1980, he said that he tracked down the real bombers, but he did not reveal their names until 2019. In the same year, campaigning relatives managed to reopen an inquest into the victim's death. During proceedings, a person known as Witness O said Sean Seamus McLaughlin, Mr. Hayes, Mr. Gavin, and Mr. Murray were involved.
The explosions, they were horrific. They were terrible. It shocked the IRA. When we found out what had happened, he defused the third bomb on the Hagley Road.
Who defused it?
I did.
Technically speaking, the true culprit still is unknown and probably remains at large to this very day. 50 years have now passed since that fateful day in 1974. It has been a long road, which is just as much about loss as it is about justice.
So we call upon the Attorney General, the Justice Minister, to please help us in our aid for legal aid. As Margaret Aspinall from the Hillsborough Group stated the day after their hearing, she said there are lots of victims' families out there who suffer from atrocities and loss and get no aid whatsoever. And then Andy Burnham MP stated and confirmed that unfortunately victims have to fight, whereas the police are able to literally just dip their hands into public funds. How is that possibly fair? How is that just? And where is the equality? Our loved ones did not ask to be murdered that night. All we want is to be heard so we can get truth, justice and accountability.
For Julie Hamilton, whose sister Maxine was one of the 21 lives killed that night, the fight for answers and accountability continues. On behalf of all the affected families, she has been campaigning to provide closure for everyone. Let us know what you think of this video, however, down below, and let us know who you think did it. Is it somebody from the IRA, or is it somebody else that we mentioned throughout this video, or do you have your own ideas on the matter? Thanks for watching.